Welcome everyone. We are here today with Keya Patel, Director of Product for Growth at Headspace. She's joining us from Santa Monica, in California, to talk about pricing and monetization experiments.
Perfect. I can take it from here then, Mirela, right? Perfect.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah,
and looking forward to your talk.
of course. So Mirela gave a little bit of background, but I also want to give you a little bit of background on myself. So I've been at Headspace for almost 3 years now. I started in late 2017. So later this year, it'll be 3 years, which is a little surprising. It's felt like both a long time and no time at all, given how much we've done over the last 3 years. And I'll talk through some of that. Previous to Headspace, I was at Dropbox for about 3 years, where I worked on our growth and monetization team, which was a newly formed growth team concentrated on accelerating our growth for our consumer product and our business product. And then before Dropbox and Headspace, I was more in the world of taking care and being part of nonprofits. And that was kind of an interesting transition as well to move into tech and really thinking about growth from there. So that's a little bit of background on myself. Today, I will be focusing on what I just mentioned, which is growth and monetization. And I'll talk through how I define growth and monetization, and then specific areas within growth and monetization, which you can see in the 3 smaller bubbles below. But essentially, how I define growth and monetization and how I've seen it at both Dropbox and Headspace is really answering the question of how do you increase your user base and get them to then pay and stay with your product if they see value in it. And so this is essentially growing things like how many like downloads or installs or registrations you might have, and then also understanding how many subscribers you might have or paid customers, and as a result, revenue and recurring revenue potentially. So within growth and monetization, there's traditionally a few different buckets. Different people call these different things, but the way I'm classifying it for this conversation is activation, conversion, and retention. So activation is really that first instance that a user has with your product. So that's something like the sign up screen, what the onboarding experience looks like, and also like what your positioning and value props are in order to sell your product and get people to be interested in it. This also, the activation piece, I would say, is also very closely tied with marketing or some upper funnel activities like paid acquisition or even like email comms and brand awareness that might be happening. The next section is conversion, and I'll be talking actually like zooming in on conversion with 4 or 5 examples today. So that's where we'll spend the majority of the time. And the way I define conversion is essentially getting people to see enough value in the product to pull out their payment method and consider purchasing your product. So that's the example that Mirela gave earlier, where because of our sleep product, that was the moment where she maybe thought that Headspace was valuable enough to pay for it. And some of the typical levers that are used in conversion are areas like pricing and price testing to understand how to best position yourself in a market, using things like a free trial or an introductory period of a certain amount of time to get folks to get hooked onto a product. Deciding what content is free versus paid, and determining if you want to follow a freemium model or free trial model, or even nowadays what's called a publisher model, which is what you see with The Guardian and New York Times and other outlets, where they let you get like 2 to 5 articles for free before you see those nasty paywalls that are asking you to pay all the time. And then the last area is in conversion is really thinking about the purchase moments and when it's most relevant to ask people to potentially think about purchasing your product. So whether that's on day 1 after they give certain information, or day 30 when they give you enough background information and inputs around what they're looking for within your product. And then the final piece around growth and monetization, which really is more about the long-term sustainable growth of your product, is retention. So retention takes 2 forms. One is thinking through moments where after someone's purchased, how to get them to continue to engage and see value in your product. And then the other piece of retention is really thinking about the renewal period or like the end of life cycle period. So that might be something like the cancellation flow or questions that you ask each month or each year to see how people are engaging or liking it or not liking the product. And then in some situations, if someone leaves the product, there's also a period of retention called win back, where folks might still be interested in coming back to the product after a certain amount of time. And that's the win back period. So again, I won't talk too much about activation or retention, but we can definitely talk about those in the time after this presentation during the informal chat. But I'll be zooming in on the conversion aspect and going into quite a few examples from my time at Dropbox and then also at Headspace. So let's start with orienting this around what conversion metrics even look like, or how to look at success within conversion. And I'll illustrate here some of the metrics that my team used at both Dropbox and Headspace, just so you can compare how different people and folks use this in industry. And I would say, obviously, if you're a smaller size company, not all of these metrics will apply to you. It might be most important just to look at like revenue or purchases. But on the Dropbox side, on the left, you'll see some of the major areas we looked at in terms of priority or chronological order was first starting with ARR, which is annually recurring revenue, since we were a subscription product. So this was essentially a way just to measure like revenue that was coming in each day, and then what we can expect 1 month or 1 year out. From there, a way to proxy what our revenue could be was looking at how many free trial starts we were seeing and what the conversion rate was on those free trials. So for example, at Dropbox, let's say we had 100 free trial starts a day. We were definitely not at 100, probably in a magnitude of 5 to 10 times more than that. But if we had 100 free trial starts a day, we could then estimate what their conversion rate would be. So we would say, if we have 100 free trial starts today, about 50% of them might convert to be a paid product. So we can assume that we'll get about 50 free trialists in a week or so, and that equates to X amount of revenue. So it would essentially allow us to really easily forecast through free trial starts as a proxy of our revenue. The next area was understanding or looking at direct purchases. So people who don't even want a free trial, they're just ready to purchase Dropbox and have associated or use the consumer product of Dropbox and are ready to purchase. And that's just, again, kind of like a volume metric of 100 direct purchases a day that we're able to then multiply that by $12.99, which was our price at the time, to understand that we were bringing in X amount of dollars or revenue. Then the next area was looking at the percentage of our free trial starts or our purchases on our annual plan. So for those of you who are familiar with the subscription world, you'll often see that subscriptions are either at a monthly billing rate plan or annual, and sometimes they're at a 3-month or 6-month or 1 week even. But most companies have a preferred billing plan. And for companies that are looking to essentially be able to predict their revenue on a more consistent basis, like Dropbox or Headspace or even Spotify or New York Times or YouTube or any of these places, they're looking to basically shift people a little bit more to annual because they're able to retain people on that plan for a little bit longer. So by understanding the percentage of people on annual, you're actually understanding to some extent the health of the business. And being able to shift more and more to annual allows you to secure what forecasts and revenue can look like 1 year out or so. And then the last area, which different folks call this different things in the subscription world, but the last one is called TPCR, which is the trial to purchase conversion rate. And I mentioned this a little bit or hit at this before, but essentially what TPCR is understanding of the 100 free trialists who start, what percentage of them actually convert. So at most places, the benchmark for this is about 50%, give or take. But different companies have different trial to purchase conversion rates depending on what type of free trial they have, what their length is, and whatnot. And then on the right-hand side, some of these will be repeats from Dropbox, but I'll go into some of the ones that are more detailed to Headspace. But on the right side for Headspace, some of those conversion metrics that we're looking at, the first one, which is unique to Headspace, but many other companies use this, including some of my peers at Duolingo and Asana. But the first one is called install to sub conversion rate. So what this means is if you install a subscription, or sorry, if you install a product or register for a product today, within 30 days, how many of those people who installed today have converted or paid. So that 30 days, you can imagine, can be a little bit contentious. That could be within 5 days, within 10 days, within 7 days, whatever time period feels most appropriate. But 30 days is something within Headspace specifically that we've oriented around to essentially be able to try to get our install to sub conversion rate to be at a certain percentage by 30 days after their registration. The next area is gross bookings, which is another term in some ways for revenue. So also looking at revenue on a quarterly basis and even more frequently than that. And then similar to Dropbox, also looking at the volume of free trial starts and purchases. And then the last one, which again is similar to that percentage of free trial starts on annual, on Headspace, also looking for the percentage of free trial starts on annual versus monthly, since we only have those two rate plans. So the reason I showed this line is essentially just to orient you around some of the metrics that we're looking at. Not all of these need to be used by every company, but in the subscription world specifically, and then also in the monetization world, a lot of these metrics pop up regularly and are sometimes explained with different nomenclature as well. So now I'll go into some of the specific examples around conversion and some successful experiments that I've seen in the past, again, both at Dropbox and Headspace. So the first two that I want to talk about are related to pricing, but I'm happy to talk more about price testing specifically and willingness to pay research as well in the follow-up or in the Q&A. But these are actually like very, very, very basic price tests that move the needle quite a bit at Dropbox on my team. So the first on the left-hand side is you can see that we say keep your stuff safe with Dropbox Pro. Dropbox Pro is affordable as 3 cups of coffee per month. So essentially by comparing our price to something that was very relatable to the majority of the users, which is coffee and cups of coffee, we were able to create essentially like a relationship and a friendliness that then allowed people to basically say, okay, I can afford 3 cups of coffee a month with Dropbox. And this experiment, we basically were really trying to get folks to understand Dropbox is very affordable and it will provide that value, even if you don't think that. And so with this example, I don't know the exact conversion rate lift, but you can imagine that before this, all we showed was the price of Dropbox Pro, which was $9.99 a month in USD, and I think a little bit more expensive in euros. And essentially what we did was change from just showing the price to showing the comparison as cups of coffee. And that increased our conversion rate, or the number of people clicking on this upgrade your Dropbox button and then actually going forward with purchasing by X percentage. And then on the right-hand side, this is a similar example, but a little bit different in terms of how Dropbox displayed their pricing. So you'll see that we show that the Plus plan has all of these different features or value props. And then at the bottom, we show the price. But you can see that we've selected build yearly, and then the price is broken down to be the monthly cost. So it doesn't actually show the yearly cost up front. And the reason behind that is essentially to be able to make the cost feel more palatable on a monthly basis. So it's breaking down the full price and dividing it by 12 to show that monthly price. That might be also considered as being a little bit deceiving. So as soon as you click on that, the next page on the right, you can see the actual full price where it's $119.88 USD. So you can also see that's a little bit odd of a price, and that it is $119, it ends in 88. So to kind of break that down properly on the previous page, we decided to show that $9.99. And there's actually a lot of research out there on what's called like Goldilocks pricing, where they're, from a purchasing psychology point of view, prices that end in 0.99, 0.95 are usually more compelling for users, just because that's what the retail industry and sales industry has already set the standards around. And then, so these are two examples, pretty basic examples of pricing. And I'm happy to go into more details around this, or even talk about how to price properly, since that's an activity I've done almost like 30 times or so at Headspace, but I'm just giving some examples from Dropbox here. So on the next slide, I'll go into a different conversion tactic, which is a free trial. So this is an example from Headspace, and shows you over the course of about the last year how Headspace has progressed from being a direct purchase subscription to a free trial subscription, and some of the changes we've made pretty intentionally since then. So on the furthest to the left screen, you'll see that in July of last year, we had a purchase screen which would pop up within the Headspace application anytime you were trying to access our paid content, or getting into any of our paid features as well. So essentially where there's more value within the product and where we have an upsell. And we showed two different options of people being able to purchase monthly and annual, and we're pretty upfront about the price. There was no free trial, no introductory period, no ability to get a taste of what's happening with Headspace. And from there, what we moved towards was testing different versions of a free trial. So on the next screen, you'll see that we have this Get Even More with Headspace Plus, and we tried out a very basic comparison chart that shows what's available for free versus in our Plus product. And then we showed the full price as well under the CTA or the button. From there, we actually did roll out a version of this and then continued to test that free trial. So the major piece here that I wanted to highlight on this slide is essentially how much optimization and iteration of something we can do. So in this example, we went from this basic comparison model to actually showing and seeing that something like this next screen where it says start your Headspace Plus free trial won out compared to the previous screen. And by won out, what I mean is we were essentially able to get additional free trial starts and also additional free trial starts that were annual, because of showing that annual is best value, and then also highlighting or defaulting to the annual selection. And then where we're at now is we're very close to this screen that you see all the way on the right, where we've tested new value props that are with these check marks and found some that work pretty well from a conversion standpoint. And then we also very clearly in the first line also show the price, which is a monthly breakdown, similar to what I showed on the previous screen at Dropbox, before then showing the CTA to be able to try free and subscribe from there. So this just shows the evolution of what like a purchase screen or an upsell experience could even look like as experimentation or optimization starts to happen. And then the final two examples I'll illustrate are more around differentiating what content is free versus paid, and thinking about how freemium products even work, where there's a little bit or a taste of what's free before you try to upsell or convert people. So on the left-hand side, Dropbox has done this for a while. And when I first started at Dropbox in 2015, we had what was at the top, where we essentially described Dropbox Basic as free versus Dropbox Pro, which was this like backpack, and then Dropbox for Business, which was a briefcase. And that was like a creative way of illustrating the difference between the products. And then within each of these descriptions, we talked about what's available for free versus what additional value you get. So this was a very, very basic type of comparison chart as a first iteration of what the difference between the free product or the basic product was, and then our consumer product and our business product. What this evolved into by the time I left Dropbox at the end of 2017, and then even post 2017, was a more like fleshed out version of a comparison chart, which showed what was basic, plus, and professional. And then also you can see on the left-hand side, there's actually these info buttons that if you hover over them, it describes every single feature. And this is a very, very long page. So if anyone who would be interested in like the nitty gritty and researching everything would be able to find everything on this page to understand what features are available for free in basic versus in plus versus in the professional plan. So it clearly illustrates, again, like the different tiers of the product. On the right-hand side, the way that we approached this at Headspace was a bit different, and probably what you've seen in some applications or even in media products, where initially at Headspace, what the product looked like is where you can see productivity, and each of our different courses, or what we called packs at the time, were highlighted by these rectangles or squares with basics 2, and then you could scroll through and see hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content. And there was really no differentiation to know what's within each tile, or even if it's free or paid, or if you have to upgrade or whatever that might be. And what we transform this to be is what's all the way on the right, where at the top, we have a featured piece of content that may or may not be free, but it's very clear if it is based on that lock icon that you can see next to the play button. And then on the screen, as you scroll, you can then see what is free or paid, again, based on the lock icons. So we tried to make it very easy for users to not be frustrated by clicking on everything and having to navigate themselves to understand what's free versus paid, which was really the priority. But it also in some ways helped with conversion, because people would then click into, for example, Breathe, to see what that was and understand what value they might get out of that type of meditation or mindfulness related content. Great, so those were some of the examples that I wanted to highlight today. But I also wanted to end on the note, just summarizing around, again, we talked about growth and monetization, and within growth and monetization, there's activation, conversion, and retention. On the conversion side, you really see a lot of these tactics every day. So I've pulled some of these examples from companies that I haven't talked about or that I haven't worked at, where you can see all the way on the left, Duolingo, and even companies like Busuu and what are some other Petit Bamboo and others based in Europe are using that monthly to yearly breakdown pretty regularly, similar to what I showed we did at Dropbox and even at Headspace, where they show the full price, but they also break down this monthly view. Similarly at Netflix, they have gone with the free trial model, where they literally show as their headline that you pay nothing upfront, and you'll get a 30-day free trial. And then the last one is with Spotify, and then you also see this with Apple Music and Pandora and other music providers, where they compare pretty clearly through this like carousel or scroll through what the difference is between the free versus premium product, where, for example, for free, you have ad breaks. For premium, it's ad free. And then they show these different types of value props. And this is like a different version of a comparison chart that they're using in order to differentiate why to pay or go for the premium model. Great. So I think that was it on my side in terms of going through high level, some of the conversion tactics and examples that I've worked on at Dropbox and Headspace, but there are a plethora of ones that I've worked on. So I'm happy to chat through anything that might be on your mind within the space as well.
Cool, thank you so much, Keya. This was great.
Yeah.
So for people here on Zoom, you can type your questions in the chat. And for people who are joining us on YouTube, feel free to write it in the comment section and I will transfer it to Zoom. Mm-hmm. And we already have one from Christophe Gassior. What about making yearly plans a bit cheaper than full 12 months of month-to-month subscriptions?
Yep. So that's a really good question, Christophe. With my time at Dropbox and even with Headspace, and if you look at the subscription world as a whole, you'll see that the annual product is usually somewhat discounted. So at Dropbox, the annual product was discounted by 14%, if I'm correct, compared to our monthly product. At Headspace, our annual product is almost 40% cheaper than our monthly product. And by having that price discrepancy or that discount, you're also really shifting people to purchase the annual product, again, because of some of those retention related areas I pointed out before, where it's beneficial to have folks on the annual product. So you also have to play around with what that discount might be, or what the most ideal percentage off might be. But there are industry standards to some extent around, for example, like Spotify and Dropbox and even Amazon Prime have experimented with going so far as like 20% off with annual compared to monthly. But if you look at smaller companies like Headspace, Busuu, Duolingo, and some of the others that are still like earlier on, they're willing to go usually more in terms of discounting to 30, 40%, even sometimes even like 50% in terms of what I've seen and the comparison between annual and monthly.
Okay, thank you very much for
Yeah.
explanation.
Let's
Cool.
see what other
So I'll
questions.
pick one from,
Yep.
We are flooded by questions right now. So do you want, Keya, would you like to look through them and see which one you'd like to answer? Or should I pick one as?
Yeah, why don't you pick one? Yeah.
All right, so from Mohammed Murad, he thanks you for the presentation. How do you plan your experiments for pricing and monetization? Do you follow a discovery/research process?
Yep.
This is a very good question.
Yeah, it is a very good question. So over here, I showed you, again, very basic examples of pricing. To me, this is nowhere close to as complicated as pricing can get. So in terms of setting pricing, I'll give you an example of one that we did at Headspace, both when I first started in 2017 and then again last year in 2019, where essentially the way we've gone about starting price testing, when we really didn't have enough audience when I first started in 2017. So we could not do complicated A/B tests as much. The way we decided to start was doing what's called willingness to pay research, or in like statistics, it's also called conjoint analyses, where you essentially survey your members and also potential new members, and you ask them what a reasonable price to pay for the product would be, and you give them a description of the product. And then you also ask them what an expensive price to pay would be, and you give them a description of that product. So those essentially shows you the two anchor price points of where that consumer might want to pay. And if you have a sample size of anywhere from like 50 to 500 people, you're then able to essentially create a curve, which typically looks like an S curve at the end of the day. And where that S kind of flattens out or becomes the most vertical is usually the anchor price point, where you should feel comfortable operating around and testing against. So a lot of humans in general will anchor around like $100 price point, for example, or a $50 price point or a $10 price point. And so you know that if that $10 price point is right where that S curve is happening, you should also look at where the flattening happens, because you have a little bit of room to play between those. So if it's $10 that it's like most vertical, but it's flattening around $12, you can likely test like 10, 11, 12 euros or pounds or whatever, and see what might make the most sense from a customer point of view. So you do that research in terms of, again, that willingness to pay or conjoint analysis. But from there, if you do have audience size or the ability to do some A/B testing, then I would likely suggest that you use the control of either your existing price point or the price point that you see in industry versus what you're seeing in research, to be able to essentially determine if that's the right price. And the other point I'll add to that is, obviously at smaller companies, you won't have that audience size to be able to do that, similar to how it was for me at Headspace when I first started. But a lot of times folks will anchor to competitor pricing, which I think is okay to do, but know that your consumer base or potential consumer base is likely to some extent different than your competitors or to the market as a whole. So it's very, very likely that they also guess their price. So that's just kind of a learning lesson that I've had, especially as at Headspace, I learned that our pricing was anchored to Lumosity, which was like a brain training application. And there was no science behind it. It was just, oh, we see that Lumosity is priced like this, let's price similarly. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to do if you know that they've done some research or thoroughness around it, but it would also be worthwhile to conduct those surveys on your own. Thanks for that question.
Cool. And I think a follow-up one could be slightly changing the question that Gaurav posted. How do you deal with pricing per market? So he asks, how do you tackle some parts of the world where applying the American pricing and just converting it in the local currency would make it too cost prohibitive?
Yep. So that's a great question. At Headspace, we actually, I think it's been every year or so, maybe every 18 months or so, we look at some of the prices in countries where you literally cannot apply the US pricing or the Euro pricing. So examples of that might be in like India or Brazil, where that one-to-one exchange will be pricing out of market for most people in that country. So in those regions, you can also do A/B testing if you have the audience in those regions, but again, most companies do not. So in those regions, what I would actually suggest is using or understanding areas around GDP, and then also within this, like if it's a subscription product or an app product, within the Play Store and the App Store, you can usually see what the percentiles are of purchasing power within each country. So for example, you can see how Headspace is priced in India compared to others in the health and fitness category, to be able to get a better sense of if you want to be at average, if you want to be higher than that or lower than average in terms of what folks in that country are purchasing in that for that category. And then you can adjust accordingly. So that's not necessarily based on A/B testing or experimentation, but it's at least based on what purchasing power in that country is on that specific platform.
Thank you, Keya.
Yeah. Cool. One from Chris Chadwick. What's your favorite A/B testing tool for mobile apps?
Yeah, so I've worked with a few. Right now, what we use at Headspace is Optimizely, and that's been what we've been using for about a year or so now. I've also worked with like in-house experimentation tools as well, and that's a bit more of upfront cost, obviously. There are also tools within Google Analytics that you can use as well if you're doing like checkout flow related testing on a website and whatnot. So my favorite right now is Optimizely, but if I could, I would go the route of having like in-house related tools, just because those can be much more catered to the audience type that you want to bucket, like being able to do analytics off of that very easily and whatnot, but that obviously has a higher like upfront resourcing cost.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, so one that Marcus Günther posted earlier about the KPIs that you measured. He's curious about the why behind each KPI.
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me go back to the KPI slide. So if I think of it as a whole, there's essentially like a couple different types of metrics. One is revenue, and I think it's a bit obvious as to the why behind that, just because most often growth and monetization teams are bringing in upwards of 70% of revenue for the company. So for example, at Dropbox and even at Headspace, both of my teams have been bringing in like 80% plus of revenue for our organizations. And as a result, revenue or some sort of revenue related metric is of utmost importance, just to monitor business health and monitor like quarter over quarter growth. So that's a little bit easy for revenue. The next one is usually around like free trial starts or conversion rate or this install to sub conversion rate. And the reason I would say we look at that is because that's a proxy for revenue. And by that, what I mean is by being able to understand how many contracts or deals or purchases you're having each day to some extent, you can then extrapolate out what your revenue can be for the next week or the month or the year. And it gives you an idea of what, if the business is stable, if it's growing, if it's not growing. So that's why we look at some of those volume and rate-based metrics. And then the last one around like the percentage of annuals and the trial to purchase conversion rate. The reason we look at that, or the why behind those, is for the percentage of annual, that's to be able to understand if we're having like higher retaining customers for, again, long-term business growth, and being able to understand if we're able to bring in folks who will be around in 1 year's time. And then for the trial to purchase conversion rate, being able to monitor if people are going from like interest to purchasing. That's important to be able to understand essentially if we're properly able to like convince people of the value of the product and actually convert at the end of the trial. So that the why behind that one is quite important, because anyone can start a free trial since it's free. But we're really trying to understand what that percentage of people convert at, because that is what will gross us any revenue.
Do you have a follow-up on that, Marcus? All right, he said thanks a lot. Sorry, I missed the message.
Sure, yeah. I can also just jump in, maybe that's quicker. I was wondering, customer lifetime value was not there. That has been quite hyped around for some time, but I was kind of missing that.
Yeah, so that's actually a good question, or a good point that you're bringing up, Marcus. And I did not preface this, but I think there are basically two different types of major parties relating to growth and monetization metrics. One is the party that comes, I think, much more from the marketing point of view. And oftentimes, if you're coming from that marketing point of view, your metrics and the way you operate a growth and monetization team is based on customer acquisition costs, subscriber acquisition costs, customer lifetime value, ARPU, and really being able to use the terms that your investor is looking at, which is usually like an LTV to SAC ratio or an LTV to CAC ratio of 3:1 or whatever. But that's coming again from the mindset of typically like the marketing and specifically performance marketing world. So that is often the case that I'll switch to that world if our CFO is asking me for LTV to SAC ratios, or our investors are asking for those. On a day-to-day basis though, I operate a lot more in the product world, which uses the metrics that you see on this slide, and usually actually thinks of retention more in terms of retention rates or cohorts of retention, as opposed to just the LTV. So you're right in that, like, there is some switching that you have to do between those two worlds. I would say usually like earlier stage companies that are looking for investment opportunities are the ones who are, I think, a lot more about LTV and customer acquisition costs. Not to say that we're not doing that at Headspace, but oftentimes product teams won't use that mentality on a daily basis. They'll only use it if we're going for a new round of funding or talking with our investors or partnering with the marketing team.
Cool, that was super insightful. Thanks, Keya.
Yeah, of course.
And one question from Onur Kazmaz. Do you consider move, focus, sleep as features of Headspace that are complementary to the meditation part? Or do they help? Do you consider they help conversions directly? How do you measure their effect on conversions separately?
Yep. So that's a good question. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, up until this year, Headspace was essentially a meditation product, and we only had meditation related courses. So anything from like stress and anxiety to meditations on grieving to meditations on feeling overwhelmed. Earlier this year, and still ongoing, we've been releasing categories that are peripheral to meditation. And we're essentially moving more into the mindfulness space because we found that our customers don't have 10 minutes of a day to meditate. They have 10 minutes of a day to be mindful, though. So we're essentially switching around what our positioning is in the market to be much more around mindfulness. And that's why you see sleep-related content, focus-related content, move-related content, eat or food-related content as well. And then meditation, which is our kind of like core bread and butter that formed Headspace. So in terms of answering the question then, I personally see those additional verticals as additional ways that we can convert people. So an example is we've had sleep available for about a year, and some people come to Headspace specifically for sleep related questions and challenges that they have. And that allows me a new opportunity or a new cohort of users who would not have come to Headspace otherwise, and who I have the opportunity to help convert them to our paid offering of our sleep product. So in some ways it can be considered a feature, but technically I would consider that more of like a content type of play or a media play, where if you look at a company like let's see, like Netflix or Hulu, they use a breadth of content to attract different types of people and get them to convert and stay for longer. So it's similar in essence to that, to those strategies that a media company uses.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Yep. And we will take one more question before we will go into the unrecorded part of our meetup. Yep. From Alfredo Bertorelli, watching us on YouTube. With users having so many apps nowadays and paying for so many services becoming potentially unsustainable, his question is, do you think that we might see again the days where we pay once for a product and own it? So like the old desktop days.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I too often have the tiredness of having way too many subscriptions, even though I operate and work in the subscription world. So it's a very good question. I personally actually think what will happen is we move to a world of bundling more and more. And by that, what I mean is you've seen this with like telecom deals and media players, for example, where in the US, like T-Mobile has partnered with Hulu and they sell something together. Same with Disney Plus, ESPN, and AT&T, if I'm correct. So an example for Headspace might be partnering with, say, like Nike, or partnering with a like sleep-related app, or maybe like Casper, or some of these things that are related to Headspace to essentially sell as one bundle at one price, because our customers would get too exhausted of having like 3 different subscriptions within one category. So eventually I think that's the way that we'll go more and more into. I do personally think like there might be more one-time purchase events that'll start to happen again in a few years' time, but I don't think the subscription strategy or model has been erased yet, or it's still attractive enough that more and more people are entering this type of space and are interested in subscriptions.
Cool. Then thanks a lot, Keya. And now we'll be switching to our unrecorded part of this event. For everyone on YouTube, you've received the link. And this was Keya Patel, Director of Product Management Growth at Headspace,